Welcome. I'm Olivia Messer, Editor-in-Chief of The Barbed Wire. Thank you so much for joining us for our first ever live stream. The Texas Democratic primary for U.S. Senate has been a wild ride already. Tonight, we'll unpack it all, from the historic turnout to the scandals, with a keen eye on fact-checking. We'll chat about electability, the candidates' policies, and the glaring spotlight on political content creators this cycle. A bit about The Barbed Wire. We're a next-generation independent Texas newsroom. While The Barbed Wire's outlook is progressive, our journalism is nonpartisan. In short, that means we believe that all humans and all political parties are both corruptible and flawed, and our reporting reflects that. You can find us at thebarbedwire.com, where you may subscribe to our free Wild Texas newsletter, support our investigative journalism, or become a member and get some of our deeply strange merch for free. Before we get started in earnest, a note that our audience is incredibly passionate about this election, and I want to make sure we're sticking to facts or clear opinions so that we can have a respectful, meaningful discussion. I'm so excited to introduce our guests, who are a mix of experts, commentators, and creators, some of whom have endorsed Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett in this race, and others whom have endorsed Texas State Rep James Talarico. Our panelists include Andre Triber, who is a Democratic National Committee member from Austin. He serves as chair of the DNC's Youth Council and is a longtime Democratic staffer, having been a campaign manager for several elections and a chief of staff at the Texas legislature. He spent his adult life advancing progressive candidates and policies at the local, state, and national level, and recently has focused on reforming the DNC itself to make it more transparent and responsive to the grassroots activists that are the lifeblood of the Democratic Party. Thank you for joining us, Andre. Next up is Kat Vargas, a Texas-based political commentator, digital strategist, and community organizer. The voice behind Howdy Politics, Kat works to make state and local politics easier to understand and harder to ignore, rapidly building a loyal audience across multiple platforms. Her work focuses on breaking down legislation, identifying where action can have the most impact, and offering hyper-targeted strategies that help everyday voters stay engaged without burning out. We're excited to have you, Kat. Next up, we have Kyle Tharp, an independent writer, researcher, and consultant whose expertise lies at the intersection of the internet and politics. Kyle is the only member joining from outside of Texas, so welcome to our little bubble. He is the author of Chaotic Era, a weekly newsletter that tracks trends in politics, media, and online influence, which is frequently cited by publications like the New York Times and CNN. Before going independent, he built the national division at progressive media company Courier and led communications for an anti-Trump super PAC in 2020. And of course, we also have Erica Harrison, a blogger, political content creator, and attorney based in Houston. She was a News Creator Corps Fellow in 2025. Erica has spent the bulk of her career working in diversity, equity, and inclusion, supporting communities in higher education before joining corporate America. In her spare time, Erica created Black Girls Who Brunch, which has grown a vast audience made of primarily Black professional women. Given the current political climate, Erica devotes much of her content to highlighting political issues at all levels of government and discussing the impact these policies will have on Black Americans. Thank you all for joining us. So let's start from the very beginning. Polls. Polls are changing all the time and not always accurate, but they do give a good insight and picture into how voters in certain areas are moving. To be honest, a lot of them feel like they're in conflict with each other. So I wanted to start with how folks are feeling about predictions for how tonight will unfold. A couple of other notes. Crockett entered the race a few months after Talarico did. Crockett said last week, "I'm used to being outspent, but I will never be." For as close as the polls are, according to the New York Times, supporters of Telerico have helped him heavily outspend Crockett and her allies by about $24.5 million to $5 million on ads. Kat, let's start with you. How are you feeling about where things stand, and what are your predictions?
I mean, I feel good, but I also feel like anyone who's making a prediction, we just don't know, because we had such a high turnout of first-time primary voters in particular, so we don't have that history there. It's really hard to poll a state like Texas. That's why they're all over the place. I think anyone that's telling you they know what's going to happen here in a few hours is just lying. And I try to, keep us focused on what we know. I do feel good. And what I was hearing as I was kind of going out to polls, in the last 2 weeks, I've been in McAllen, I've been on the ground in Houston, I've been on the ground in Austin as well, talking to voters, knocking on doors, poll greeting, all those things. Something I did find is that most voters were showing up to the polls not knowing what they were voting on. And in that light, I do think it's hard to believe those same voters go into a booth and know a lower name ID candidate to select on the ballot. But really, we don't know. We're going to have to see what happens. And it is interesting seeing there's the different spins both in our race and in the Republican race as well, and to see what ends up happening tonight.
Kyle, what about you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think being the only one of us outside of Texas and DC right now, I have a very warped idea of what's happening with the race. I've really seen, the polls are all over the place, like you mentioned, like one candidate's up by 10 points. And
All right, well, Kyle froze, so I'm going to move us on to Andre.
Well, what's funny is you can copy paste a lot of Kat's answer for myself. Texas is having an extraordinary turnout in the Democratic primary. That's something that I think should be really exciting to Texas Democrats. And another thing, and I think this also is going to preview a little bit when we talk later about, influencers and social media, is most Texas Democrats have a positive opinion about both candidates. Sure, there are acrimonious corners online, but most voters are seeing this as an embarrassment of riches, where we get the opportunity to choose between two awesome candidates. So I am also not really in the business of making predictions, especially when we have this modern leaning in those kinds of requisite in order for and it
So in early 1.3 voting state. I don't know.
Local political mayor. And I think December 8th, when she in the room, is that they've got their own.
That Crockett is upset that the
Polling place
A district judge saw voters just fight it back and forth, which is much, much larger.
when we say go.
Taking these fights work inside their Democratic line. So they also are not as equipped to manage these changes as a triple D voter, for example. So that's also part of the challenge here. So I think even if campaigns messaged really well for this, their messaging might most like likely primary voters who weren't the ones having the issues. It's people who don't typically vote in primaries. So I think there's a lot going on here. I think there are, I'm going to always say we can always message more. I always like the more, it takes almost 3 times for people to get it. That's one. I think two, there's onus on voters as well. We need to do our own. We need to be looking to understand elections better, going, checking our websites, all of that. And then also too on the state, how is the state website not working? There are 254 counties in the state. It is impossible for me, for Kat, for any content creator to come out here and give everybody all of the important information per county. So we need those statewide websites. And if that website is not up to date, not working, it's going to be a problem as well.
Andre, where do you sit on this?
Simply put, I think any onerous barrier to voting is a barrier that needs to be removed. And unfortunately, these barriers that people are running into today, they flow downstream from the election suppression bills that have been passed at the Texas legislature. Unfortunately, elections have consequences, and Republicans have had a trifecta in Texas for 3 decades now, and they continue to restrict voting or, for instance, enable their conspiracy theory driven base to make these kinds of decisions that affect everyone in their primaries, even if they're not Republicans. So I do think this is disastrous and clearly shows what people were warning about at the legislature, what happens if you allow county parties to unilaterally dictate the elections for everyone in the counties. And that's exactly what happened here. Because to be clear, both of these counties, even just as recently as the November 2025 election, had county-wide election centers that they were voting in. People have been used to this. This has been around in Texas for several cycles. But because the Republican Party, county parties in those counties voted specifically that they wanted to use paper ballots because of the conspiracy theories that they believe in, that's what forced these primaries to divide. And that's what created all this chaos that we're seeing. So even though that party chose to do stuff to only them, it affected every voter in the county. And I do think that this is something that we absolutely as Democrats need to bring back up in 2027 when the legislature comes again. We can point right to it and say, hey, the thing we warned you that was going to happen absolutely did happen. Votes were suppressed. I hope when all is said and done, especially with the judge extending time, that we see that people were able to exercise their right to vote. But the fact is, if even a single person was turned away due to this confusion that was created by the votes of Republican precinct chairs, that's one person too many. And we got to be ready to hold them accountable.
Okay, let's move to the candidates specifically. First, we'll talk Talarico. The state representative is 36, a former middle school teacher and Presbyterian seminarian who grew up in Austin. Served in the Texas House of Representatives since 2018. Supporters, well, for what race? Joe Rogan said he should run for president. Obama called him a really talented young man, and he's been endorsed by the Houston Chronicle, the Dallas Morning News, Fort Worth Star-Telegram, Austin Chronicle, and Austin American Statesman. So I open the floor. Talk to me about Talarico's best moments from the campaign to his earlier times in office. Why are people so enraptured by him?
I guess I can jump in.
Yeah.
Sure.
I have a feeling one of them has to say on this topic.
What I think is particularly appealing to me as James Talarico is he is someone that has been able to show through his time in the Texas legislature that he's both a fighter that can spar and go toe-to-toe with Republicans in committees and on the House floor. You can see him going after them bill after bill after bill. And yet, despite doing that, he's still able to also advance and pass his own legislation in the House. As someone that worked in the House for a long time, that's something that matters a lot to me. One of my guiding lights comes from Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and she said that progressives have a moral obligation to be effective. And that's something that I take to heart. I want someone that is going to fight for my values, and I also need them to achieve progress when they do that. Because at the end of the day, the reason why I am a part of the Democratic Party is I'm involved in party politics because I want to win elections. I want to win elections because I want to pass policy, and I want to pass policy because I want to make people's lives better. So someone that has that track record of passing policy, of fighting for us, he's my representative, and I've been very happy with what how he's represented us. There's been times where I've had to go to the legislature and call up Democrats who cast bad votes on things like banning marijuana in Texas, or cast bad votes on housing. And I've never had to go to his office because he's already there, as a co-sponsor, as a co-author on these things. So I love his record, and I think he's an effective communicator. He's been able to lead with his values and communicate them in such a way that people that might be used to hearing what I'll call, Democratic consultants speak, and I think we can all kind of think of what that means in our head. We just need to be better as a party at communicating the way that normal folks talk. And he's able to boil down issues like affordability, like corruption. A major thing with him is talking about the billionaires and the real 1% that we need to be afraid of, and communicating those in regular conversational voice with people. And I think that is really good at attracting voters, especially disaffected ones, or ones that have also felt abused by the system. So I think he is very much set up to especially take on Ken Paxton, which is the likely but not certain Republican nominee. And he provides a strong foil as someone that was already there at the legislature and voted to impeach Ken Paxton himself when he was busted doing all of those crimes. So I think he'll make our party proud, and I think he's got a record that he can run on, and he's got a good way at communicating it out to people.
Yeah, I think on the national level and the view from DC here, a lot of people, the National Democratic Party is doing a lot of soul searching since the 2024 election loss. And part of that is looking for new, different types of messengers to speak to different audiences. That's why I think a lot of folks in DC have been really sort of captivated by James Talarico. He looks different than other Democrats that run. He talks a lot about Christianity, being seminarian and whatnot. And like Andre said, like the anti-oligarchy messaging, he's been able to sort of take that from sort of a radical, scary thing and start to talk to normal people in plain language about how it's not just left versus right, but those on top versus the rest of us. I think that's like one major reason why he's taken off. And you asked about moments. I think, just from being outside of Texas, you always see him giving these sort of viral floor speeches in the Texas House. You see him doing these quick viral moments. Even his campaign launch ad, got tons of traction because folks are seeing him speak as a different messenger with a different message. So that's what I'd say about him.
Yeah, I was curious from the national perspective, when did people start paying attention? In my mind, it was the quorum break, and some of the activity in Chicago really seemed to create this sort of persona of media darling. It was like Politico, Time, every magazine had is this man going to save Texas? And I feel like that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that really started spiking after the quorum break.
No, last summer for sure, particularly as he was starting to consider running for Senate. But even before that, folks had always been rumouring, oh, there's this new guy in Texas that you should start paying attention to. He could be the future of the party. And you're right. You've seen that. I would say the vast majority of folks that work in Democratic politics in DC are very, very captivated and supportive of Talarico's candidacy.
All right, let's chat about Crockett. 44 from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, began her legal career as a public defender in rural East Texas, then moved to criminal defense, civil rights, personal injury attorney, before serving in the Texas House of Representatives in 2021 and then running for Congress. Endorsements include former Vice President Kamala Harris, the organization Emily's List, Cardi B, Colin Allred, San Antonio Express News. Kat, Erica, talk to me about Crockett. What are her high moments of the campaign, of her career? What has really made people excited and hopeful about her?
I'll go first. I would say for me, one of the big things that stands out to me would be her debate performance. I think she did excellent, especially towards the end. She, as an attorney in this current moment, we're going to need people that are coming in with the knowledge of our Supreme Court, the impeachment process, the Constitution, and not just an average American knowledge, like an expert in those different things. And so she passed the same state bar that I did in Texas, and I'm confident that she's equipped to do that. And we saw that her be able to explain that process in a very clear way during the debate. I think the other thing for people is that my mindset is when we're thinking about who we put forward, we shouldn't bench our best fighters. I think all of us would agree that she's one of the top communicators and advocates in the Democratic Party right now. And to put her in a bigger position, I think is really important. We've seen her advocate during these hearings. Most recently, when the Pam Bondi hearing, she read the room so well and was able to respond to Pam Bondi, who was not going to answer any questions, that was trying to basically filibuster a hearing, an oversight hearing. We saw her use that time to speak to the American people about what's actually happening. I think that was very powerful as well. And here in Houston, my favorite thing is that she likes to go. She's kind of had a non-traditional campaign. She's gone to meet people where they are. She has gone to all the different clubs and different spots in our LGBTQ plus community, historic Black neighborhoods, to meet people where they are, people that probably have never seen a Senate candidate before in their community, because they don't go to rallies. They don't do that. But she's gone to find them. I think that's been super powerful. So for me, communicator, the experience, she's got federal experience, and we've seen how she's been able to make these moments and really explain things to American people about affordability, about healthcare, all these other concerns. And I think that this is the moment to put forward our best fighter, our most experienced fighter in the Senate from Texas.
Yeah, I think for Crockett, for a lot of people, it's that, look, we're all really frustrated in this moment. And what we're hearing over and over again is that Democrats aren't meeting the moment, but we never hear that about Crockett. People feel that whether it's in a committee, a press conference, no matter what it is, they feel like she is speaking the way that we are all feeling at home. I don't want someone to be like, oh man, groceries are up high. No, I want someone saying your tariffs are causing groceries to go up. We've got moms that are like praying that they can afford the bill when their kid breaks their arm, and have that right kind of anger for what's happening, because these are not normal times, and this is not the time to have this like straight buttoned up, political speak answer that a lot of people don't understand. Early on in the campaign, there was another creator, that goes by the name of I'm Legally Hyped, who had posted something that had stuck with me. And she said that the average adult in America reads at about a middle school level. And so I went and put in a bunch of different politicians' campaigns, statements, speeches, and looked at them all. I had probably like 24 now that I've done, because I keep doing this. And they are mostly written at a 12th grade and above level. That means the majority of Americans don't know what they're saying. And that's the big problem that Democrats have. We have great policy. People don't understand what that policy is because we don't do a good job explaining it. That is not an issue with Crockett. She knows her audience really well. You can tell based on the room that she's in. She knows how to deliver and talk to the issues that they care about. She's one of the #1 fundraisers in the House. She's like the 5th highest Democrat fundraiser, which is incredible, knowing that she's only in her 2nd term. That's a big deal. Those things matter. The relationships that she's been able to build matter. The fact that Nancy Pelosi came in to support her in this race, not someone that you would expect, it has her back. Those things all matter. The attention that she brings matters. As when we're talking about, getting things passed and things, Congress works a little bit different than the Texas House. You might have noticed not very much passes at all in Congress, but she has done a really good job of making sure she secures funds for her district, millions of dollars going into Texas 30 because of the efforts that she has. And I point a lot to Joaquin Castro, who I absolutely adore. Wish we could have had him on our ticket as well. And he was named in the last Congress the most effective Democrat in the House. And he did that by attaching his priorities to other bills. Because when you are a progressive like he is and like she is, they're both part of that caucus, which, by the way, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, they kick you out of the caucus if you do not vote with them enough. And so in order to be that progressive and get things passed, they have to attach things to other bills. That's what both of them have done. She's very effective in committees. I don't think anyone that saw her with Pam Bondi would say, man, that's not who I want. No, everyone saw that and was like, that's who I want fighting for me. That's who I want in the Senate, knowing that that's who also would be in these Supreme Court confirmation hearings and everything else. Having that legal mind does matter. That experience matters. And in this, she is the most experienced candidate that we have on the ballot. And we can have arguments about how important that is, but that is just fact when it comes to Crockett. And then also how she's talked about from the very beginning. I have been open on Howdy that I had conversations with all campaigns, and in all of them I asked, what is your strategy for the down ballot? Talarico's answer is on video, and he said, he was going to share rally attendees with the local county parties, which is great. Crockett's answer was, I'm going to help turn out these low propensity voters that also benefit them. I'm going to invest in their races. Those are things that matter. The infrastructure she's able to build. Andre was talking earlier about how he had to spend that $20 million to help raise his name ID to be competitive in this primary. that's $20 million that had to stay focused on his campaign. With Crockett, what we see and what people are excited about, because really this is about strategy. This is on policy, they're very, very similar. With Crockett, that money can stay in the state. That money can go towards infrastructure that we badly need as Texas Democrats. You know, we've got Texas Majority PAC and Texas Democrats and Beto, who are all trying hard to build that. But the more money we have going into that, more focus we have going into that, it's not just the top of the ticket. It is the full ballot that we have, and what she brings to the table on that is what people are looking at.
I think this is a great moment to point out that it truly is an embarrassment of riches for progressive candidates. Beto O'Rourke told the Texas Tribune that he was not alive the last time that we had this kind of talent in a statewide Democratic primary. Democratic primary voters are very excited about their choices. Crockett's favorable ratings are slightly higher than Telerico's, according to MSNBC, but both are well liked. Andre, I'm curious if they're considering there's so much overlap on their policy positions. Where are there differences? Where are the deviations? Not just in terms of strategy, but in terms of positions.
Sure. And I think when all is said and done, if we could run a parallel world, at the end of the day, they would probably have something like a 97% overlap on Senate voting records. And I do think you identified that a lot of people are voting stylistically or on strategy, but I don't think that there's zero difference. A major thing that I see come up a lot in progressive circles is her support for Israel versus his open criticism of it. That is a dividing line that has not been as stark in this primary as it has been in other primaries, but you absolutely do see it. And I think there's also been like recent differences over the like condemnation over the war in Iran. His was much more clear cut. Hers is about process. But as I said, I don't think you have these stark differences. I do know that last night, James Talarico himself was asked if there was, what is a policy difference between them. And he said that he would personally co-sponsor, a bill that is out there to ban members of Congress from being able to own and trade individual stocks. This is something that comes up a lot in progressive cycles to prevent members of Congress from personally enriching themselves, with insider trading. And I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that she was doing that. That's the example of a bill that he would co-sponsor that she has not. But at the end of the day, as I said, you can look at their voting records. You can look at the time where they were in the House together. They're not deviating on a vast majority of these priorities. They've both been a strong voice for public education. They're both good at like taking these Republicans to task. It is, I think, a minority of voters in this race that are choosing over these narrow policy differences ultimately. So not to say that there are none. Again, the loudest ones that I hear especially are people that are pro-Palestinian, that support Gaza, that strongly dislike her votes to give aid to Israel. But I that's just simply not coming up as much in this primary as you hear in other primaries, because as we've all identified, what people are discussing is the strategy and approach, and I find that is what is driving a vast majority of the debate in this race.
I just want to point out. I don't know. Eric was going to jump in. I'll let Eric.
Because just so we're clear, their stances on Israel and Palestine are identical, and she has votes because she's in Congress. That's why she has votes. And I want us to be very careful with that language, because that has been used in a very similar fashion as it was with Kamala Harris. It has been used and weaponized against Jasmine Crockett in a way that is often involved misogynoir. So much so, the NAACP had to respond to a content creator this week who had been posting videos out of context about Jasmine Crockett. The NAACP does not respond to content creator stuff. They responded because he'd been using misinformation and trying to use the NAACP award to justify what he was doing. So I want to be very clear about that. That to me is probably one of the most unfair things I've seen in this race, is this pitting their positions about Israel and Gaza as different. They both have said defensive weapons. They have nearly identical stances. And the difference is she's in Congress, so she's going to have votes that he won't have because he's in the state house. Just want to be clear on that.
Kat?
Yeah, it was the same. They have the same stance on this. He issued out a 3-page memo in January to his Jewish supporters. I don't know why that was selectively sent to supporters and that wasn't a campaign-wide thing. I think that's an issue of itself. Whereas, because like Erica said, she's in Congress, we know exactly where she stands and everyone knows exactly where she stands. That's something you had to dig for a little bit more in his campaign. But it's not where there's daylight. It's also, I can tell you, in all the doors that I have knocked, I have not been asked about this one time. Not that Andre was saying that. I know you said it's not been as big of an issue here. I think it's been more of a very online thing. And I think all of us have tried to tell people, like, go touch grass, go touch some doors and see what voters are actually talking about. Because again, it's just not been an issue at any door that I've come to, or if it has, they've known that they have similar stances.
Kyle?
He freeze.
Uh-oh. Okay. Andre, did you have any follow-up there?
I think this will be an agree to disagree thing, and then that's okay. We ultimately are on this panel because we have differences of opinion on this. I do see that there's daylight there. That's part of why I brought it up, but that's okay.
All right. So there's been a lot of focus on 6 million Latino, Latinx, Latine voters in Texas, particularly since the 2024 election. A narrative emerged that Trump won Latino voters. We published a story in November 2024 disputing some of that, though there were some historic gains for a Republican candidate, but the Latino vote had been spoken of as if it was some kind of mythical monolith rather than a massing voting bloc with vastly different lived experiences. Experts and pundits have pointed out that it's been critical for both Talarico and Crockett to understand Latino voting communities and to resonate with them. Do you think they've been successful, and how? And just to be clear, there's some gaffes, scandals, that kind of thing that we will talk about, but I'm curious, aside from the major headlines, in what ways have both of them managed to break through? Kat, love to hear from you first.
Yeah. As a Latino myself, I'll be really honest. I don't think either campaign did the best job on this for this primary, and they will have to do a much better job in the general election, if I'm being just brutally honest. I think a lot of what we saw from Talarico's camp was a strategy to kind of latch onto the Polito campaign and kind of ride that. But there was not, outreach within, Houston. When we saw events in Houston that were in Latino neighborhoods, the audience was white. Here in Plano, where I live, it was the same thing. It was in an area that was both Latino and a high South Asian population. The audience was white. That's been something that he's going to have to really, if he's the nominee, have a different strategy going forward to bring in those other voters. When we look at Crockett's campaign, her focus with her limited time and stuff was not the same. I won't say that she was doing great there either. I don't think we saw a genuine outreach. I think we saw from both campaigns focus on other groups. I think that's a huge mistake going into the general. I think there was a lot of kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what would stick. But I will say, just as a Latino myself, that did kind of work with both campaigns, I will give Crockett credit that before she had launched, when she was still considering, I didn't think at the time that she was going to jump in, but there was an interview request that I was granted with her that we had a mutual friend that pushed for. And the reason why she took it was because she knew that my audience is Texas based and is very highly Latino, and she wanted to be able to reach those voters. She broke I did not know this at the time. She has a rule usually when she's not on the campaign trail that she does not work on Sundays. She tries to leave that as her day of rest. And she came in on a Sunday during the shutdown and met with me. We had a real brief time. I think that speaks volumes. I do think it's interesting how the Talarico campaign has worked with Carlos Espina, who was a really good friend of mine. I think it's been great for people to see that him and I are still friends, despite supporting different candidates. And they took some feedback, from him. He and I both had very similar criticism. Unfortunately, mine was met with more backlash of the early ad the Talarico campaign had that was out in Spanish. The audio on it was a very caricature sounding audio. Carlos mentioned that. He said, hey, I don't like this dubbing that's on here. Here's how I think it could be better. That's how it came to be about the commercial he eventually filmed for the campaign, which I think is great. I think that's a great, genuine way to bring creators in. And Carlos is someone who really does have, his thumb on Latino voters in particular. But again, I hope both campaigns do better in the general, and that we do see better outreach into campaigns and not just, stopping for photo ops and things like that.
Erica, Andre, did you have anything to add?
I will just say that I'm glad to hear from a Texas Latino, because a lot of the discussions I've seen about Latino voters have not been led by Latino voters in Texas.
Yeah, and what I would add is I think Democrats should be enthused through the roof happy for what turnout has been like along the valley. You are seeing counties in border counties that are seeing primary turnout that is eclipsing general election turnout. That it is difficult to describe how amazing that is. And this is Democratic turnout. And part of this, we talked about this way at the top of the hour, is the Trump effect. Part of it is because, as Kat, as you said, both campaigns really needed to try to speak to and win these populations. It's not certainly something that I can point to personally. The things that I think have been interesting to watch are that like the Latino Victory Fund getting involved and supporting James Talarico. They've stated that they believe that he at the top of the ticket gives a better chance for their candidates to win down ballot. That's why they've been running the joint ads, in Spanish language markets, featuring both him and Bobby Pulido at the same time, asking voters to support them both. Or, like the Texas Tejano Democrats supporting James Talarico as well. You mentioned that we'll speak to gaffes later, and I think some of this does flow downstream of some of the stuff we'll probably talk about. But certainly it is not just fundamental to these primaries, but fundamental to the general election. Democrats, not just in Texas, not just locally, but nationally, absolutely need to reverse this tide of the number of Latino voters that we saw backslide into Trump. It is something that we as a party need to absolutely look inward and see how we have failed to properly meet with these communities and bring them in. That is absolutely soul searching that needs to be done, and I'm very much looking forward to kind of what the data says after this whole primary shakes out for sure.
Yeah, and I'll just add too that I think for Latinos in Texas especially, it's going to be more regional. A McAllen Latino is very different than someone in Harris County or Dallas County, or even in Tyler, where there is also a Latino population there as well. And I think that's going to be the breakdown, and more so than Latinos as a whole went this way. So it's going to depend where in those areas had the higher turnout. Harris County obviously has a huge Latino population. She's widely expected to take Harris County, so that will also shift numbers. And I think that's part of the problem as well, is that because it is so regional, it is very hard for campaigns to be able to target unless they have local people within these communities that can tell them how that particular community handles outreach best.
Okay. All right. We've got a couple of gaffe scandals headlines to go through. So
Did we miss title?
So I'd like to start with probably the biggest one and most complicated, which is when content creator Morgan Thompson posted online about the already tense race in a TikTok video alleging that Talarico told her in a one-on-one conversation he signed up to run against a mediocre Black man, allegedly referring to Colin Allred, not a formidable, intelligent Black woman, apparently referring to Jasmine Crockett. It made significant waves on social media as commentators and politicians alike rushed to voice skepticism of the claim's validity. For others, it reignited intense debates online about identity politics, electability, and race. While news organizations avoided the story at first, it got picked up when Allred posted a video about the alleged comments. Telerico's campaign released a statement calling Thompson's claim a mischaracterization of a private conversation. But then afterwards, in an interview with CNN, Allred claimed Telerico's statement wasn't a denial at all, but instead an admission that he said what he said. The mudslinging that week was mostly Democrat on Democrat in the form of a proxy war waged in part by a new era of influencers weighing in. That last bit felt uniquely 2026. I'm going to start with Erica. Talk to me about how things went down from your perspective and where you see things now.
So full disclosure, I know Morgan. I see her like a little sister in Dallas, and we battle about Dallas and Houston turnout. And I believe Morgan. So I want to start by saying that. But I know that people see the influencer thing as starting at that moment. And I think it's so important to note that how the influencer, that also feels weird. How a lot of the online conversation started, it didn't start with Morgan. It started going back when Jasmine Crockett entered the race and being met instantly with misinformation, disinformation, and some of the most racist online things I've ever seen, even worse than Kamala Harris. So that to me is the start of it. That to me also is why you see people being defensive. And so for many of us, many Black content creators like myself who had met with Talarico, who had planned to be neutral in this race until different things happened that made it so we could not do that. The Morgan moment was not the beginning of anything. It was more of an example of, for me, it felt like this was just more of the same. And so to me, it wasn't this like pivotal moment that people saw it was. And it's so interesting that that's like this inflection point for people, where for me, it was like this has been going on and on and on. This is indicative of different things. And it's indicative to me of what it felt like to me as a Black Texan that grew up here, grew up in Harris County, grew up in Cypress. It felt to me as a example of the Talarico team not understanding Black voters, not understanding why that's offensive about Colin Allred, thinking that he can make a joke about Colin Allred, and that we would accept that. And that's kind of I don't have a big take on it, because I think that people really misconstrued that moment. But I'm interested to hear what everyone else has to say.
Yeah, I want to, Kat, I want to ask at some point. I know you took some heat after defending Morgan, and I want to hear about that. But I want to give Andrea a chance to respond first.
Sure, and I don't know that I would have much to add that wasn't repeated a million times on the internet those 2 weeks. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I think we all absolutely need to condemn all of the racist and sexist comments that happen online, because I absolutely saw them. I know we all saw them too. There are there's some real bad stuff in the pits of Twitter comments and replies. And that absolutely needs to be condemned unequivocally, period. I was honestly not too surprised to hear that he had criticized Colin Allred's Senate campaign. I myself had been critical of how it interacted with the coordinated campaign previously. And so, hearing that was a criticism that he would launch was not super surprising to me. Ultimately, I do think that it was just kind of a microcosm of, sort of the very online stuff that we've been talking about, that it got really overwhelming sort of in these echo chambers. And the way these social media algorithms work is they want to feed us more of it, because these are the things that we click on. And that is how the billionaires that own these platforms get profit off of us, is by keeping us engaged. And unfortunately, psychologists have found that anger is what keeps us best engaged. So I wasn't surprised to see that be a kind of thing that really played a bunch online. But kind of going to back to what Kat said in terms of like what people are, say at the doors or whatever, it was the kind of thing that I think was very salient for the activist class, for the folks that are online. I don't think it was super salient for the average voter. And in fact, I think most of the scandals or gaffes that we talk about really are the kind of things that all of us here are going to pay attention to and certainly discuss. But for the average Democratic voter that has got a piece of literature in both hands looking and comparing, it's just not the kind of thing that really breaks through down to them ultimately.
All right, Kat, I'm anxious to hear from you.
Yeah, I like Erica, I believe Morgan, and I believe, she has said that was a direct quote. And I think to talk about a campaign is one thing, but you don't need to use those words to talk about a campaign. As far as like me getting heat for defending Morgan, that was already set in motion. I was already getting it for, speaking out against the campaign. And to be clear, my first, post that I had raising alarms on his campaign was on June 6th, way before he launched. I called out then that I was deeply concerned after Politico reported that, Liz Smith and Andrew Mamo had recruited him into this race, or were pushing him into this race. And I said that was a huge problem that I had back on June 6th. And I've stayed consistent with that in all of my analysis. I don't think, DC consultant class should be, meddling in our Texas races. I think that when you see the comms and things that have changed, there's things as simple as on his issues page where they copied and pasted from a Michigan candidate that they're also representing, things like that. I just don't think they should be involved here. I think you can't copy and paste strategy. So criticism on Howdy is because Howdy does have impact. Howdy reaches millions of Texans every single month. It does move voters, and the voters that it moves, also the base that he support has come when content speaking out about things that we had to judge. And that had already started. We saw we were already being, discredited despite the years of I have been involved. Different things. I think if we didn't have impact, there wouldn't be. I'm extremely proud of Texas creators that we have stayed focused on the race. There are a lot of.
Is she freezing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why is everyone freezing today?
I know.
My internet is usually not good, so I'm just waiting.
Knocking on wood over here.
Be next.
We did, while we wait to see if Kat's internet will improve, we did get an audience question from someone asking if a Harris endorsement at this point of Crockett is actually a good thing. Erica, did you have any thoughts on that?
I will say that. And I also just want to know, so one thing I like to do is ask my mom, who's a Black boomer, who's in church like 3 times a week, about how she perceives things. And that, what Morgan shared about Colin Allred, that did reach certain Black voters. They didn't like that. And these are not, my mom is not on Instagram. She's not on any of those kind of apps. So there's a certain pocket of people that I do think that's their first introduction to him, and that wasn't a good introduction. I'll say that. But in terms of the Kamala Harris endorsement, and it was a robocall, and I have a follower that got that call on Friday and said that when she got that call, she said, "Oh crap, let me go vote." Hung up the phone and went to go vote. So that it worked. I think, to me, when I think about who that call was for, I think about the 92%, the Black women who strongly supported Kamala Harris, who wear that as a badge of honor. The creator of the 90% Club is a Dallas native, Camille, who has a group called Black Women on a Mission. And so I think that's very rooted in Texas. So to me, I thought there's a certain audience that's going to reach, that's going to be encouraged to go vote. And I think Black women were the audience. And so is it far reaching? No, they didn't really go that deep with it. We didn't see she didn't do like a commercial, or it was just a robocall that a few people who had not voted yet got. I only encountered 2 people that got it, basically. So I do think it has power, but I think I think that's going to hurt her. There's a group of people who were excited to see that connection, excited to see Kamala Harris. We went to her book meeting, her book event, and she talked about her STARS program. And Jasmine Crockett was one of the mentees in that program. I'm pointing to the book that's in my house. It's like right over here. And she talked about the STARS program, right? And Crockett was one of the people that she was mentoring. And so I think for me, it was good to see that kind of full circle moment where it all came together. That's how I saw it.
That's so interesting.
I think so.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Kat, please.
All right, I was gonna say, something that was interesting about it though was kind of, because I do track so much of the online discourses, for weeks we've been hearing that, oh, Kamala Harris hasn't endorsed her, and that meant something. And then once she did, it was a lot of the same accounts, because I kept screenshots of that because she's the establishment and everything else. So that was kind of funny to watch.
That's so interesting too, because I went to the Kamala Harris rally to cover it in Houston, and the one that Beyonce came to. And I mean, speaking to folks in the audience, almost everybody there that I spoke to, they'd never been to anything related to a political rally before. People were so excited to be there and to see her. So even though I know that there's some defensive-ness on legacy or the person who lost, but that amount of excitement really stayed with me. The other thing, of course, some organizers and activists told MSNBC that they've taken offense to Talarico's messaging that he is more electable than Crockett. Obviously, the Los Culturistas men weighing in brought that more to the foreground. And some folks have said that it felt like a dog whistle, that Crockett is too Black or too loud and thus can't win. And I think there's been ample frustration from some voters that the Democratic Party wants Black people's campaign labor and Black people's votes, but not as interested in Black candidates who might be too risky. And I'm really curious about folks' thoughts on this sort of bigger picture electability conversation.
I will say this. I don't know if he has, now correct me. I don't know if Talarico had really leaned into that directly. I felt like it was more surrogates were leaning into that, which I thought was intentional. But to me, the electability piece has been incredibly frustrating, and it's been a campaign that's been run by some PACs that support Telerico. They've run ads, they've run flyers, and I do think there are some people that are motivated to vote for Crockett because of that. So I think that while it may have a benefit in some pockets, it also has a benefit for her in other pockets as well. For me, I found it to be incredibly dismissive and frustrating of the labor of Black women, that we are the most consistent base for this party, not just in Texas, but this entire country. And to continue to have Crockett crisscross this country to push for things like the proposition in California, to campaign for people like Kamala Harris all across this country. And then when she dares to ask for more, to aspire for more, you say that she's not electable. And I think that's probably one of my biggest fears for this race is that what message this sends to Black women voters for a second time. And this language, it was a dog whistle, plain and simple, because when you got to why she wasn't electable, they couldn't give you an answer. When you asked them to give you polling to support that, there's no polling that supports her being unelectable. They have run, we had this hodgepodge of polls. They've run virtually equal when it comes to the general election. There's no poll that has Talarico. He has not consistently been ranked higher than her in any poll when it comes to the general. And so to push this without being founded in experience, polling, favorability, any type of objective standard beyond her race and her gender, it's offensive. And to me, I will tell you, it raised a big red flag for me with where the Democratic Party is going to go, not just Texas, but also the Democratic Party as a whole, where we are going when it comes to being the big tent party, truly.
Andre, did you have thoughts on that from the Telerico camp perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree, and I would hope this would be universally agreed that the kind of language that she's unelectable because she's a woman or a black woman is unacceptable within the Democratic Party, and that is absolutely nothing you would ever have seen me say or even believe. Again, the big zoom out is most Democrats like both of them a lot. So, but this conversation does take place, and I do have some thoughts on electability, and for me, it ultimately comes down to that I think we have a lot of data points that we can point to that she fires up the Republican base more than he does. Is that fair? No, but she has been cast, as that villain. She's one of the ones they use. There's a reason why Greg Abbott is propping her up with an ad that features, Bernie Sanders and AOC alongside it. There's a reason the NRSC did the first polling in this race before she was considering it, that put it in it, because she is their candidate of choice to run against, because how much she fires up their base, which again, the fact that she fires up their base is because of a lot of that deeply rooted racism and misogyny like within their base, and that is completely unfair to her. What I point to when it comes to these kinds of things of someone that needs to win swing voters in Texas is the 2018 election, where that was, the closest we got, and that was of course the last Trump midterm. So that's kind of what I compare to. And Beto O'Rourke got about 500,000 more Democratic votes than our nominee for governor, which means there's literally 500,000 Texans out there that voted for Beto O'Rourke and Greg Abbott. And I know that might be really hard for us to comprehend, the kind of person that would do that, but that is because I believe Beto O'Rourke was running in such a way that he was genuine and out there and not antagonizing the Republican base. He was always, asking for the votes of these swing voters directly. And that is something that I believe James Talarico has been leading on, talking that we're going to leave no stone unturned and that we're going to speak with these people. And some of the issue that I do take directly with Crockett is when she makes the insinuation that we can only do this, or we can do this with only new voters and base voters and not speaking with MAGA voters. I wish that our coalition in Texas was big enough, but I think the math just shows that we still got to get those 500,000 voters plus still engage our base and turn out and register new voters. And we've got to do all of the above. And the way I have seen Talarico approach this strategically and philosophically to the race, I do think is different. And so when we've been talking about all night, people are voting over stylistic differences, over strategic differences. These are the kind of strategic and stylistic differences that I personally see if we're, going down the electability, side of the conversation. But I just have to agree with you again, like Erica, the things you've commented on about the way that a lot of people have been approaching the topic is, I think completely different, and an unacceptable way to do it when people are using her identity as opposed to like individual actions she might have taken. I think it is completely unfair and inappropriate for people to be using her identity against her.
There's a New York Times post that kind of talks about kind of like this. He has the approach of Republicans and she has the focus on the base. And so I guess the thing I would say to kind of push back like politely here, Andre, is that this idea that we're gonna grab all these Republicans, right? But the thing is that whatever you do to court them, you're gonna lose somebody in your base. Like that's going to be not appealing to them. So I always think about that. And so the other issue I have here is that while he's had this center and this kind of moderate, and I think that people often paint him as more moderate than I would say he is.
Agreed.
While you do that, I think you also are hurting yourself with Black voters who are the only demographic that is going to go into that voting booth and over 50% vote for Democrats. It's the only demographic in the state that's going to do that. And so I often am curious about this idea of like, okay, yeah, he's focusing on them, but what is he doing to get those kind of key demographics in the Texas Democratic Party? I would argue he's not doing enough. And so so when we talk about, he can get the Republicans, but can you get the Black voters to not just show up and vote for you because you're there, but show up and be excited about you in November? And I'm going to say that I don't think he can. Not with if it's how it's been right now. I don't think he can.
I would just say that I think Beto O'Rourke was able to lead with his values and not sacrifice our values. I don't think, or I'm not going to say no one would do this, but I think a lot of people would agree that Beto represented Democratic values really well and managed to capture those swing voters without having to sacrifice important parts of our coalition or important parts of the fundamental values we share. But I get where you're coming from.
As well, though, but I do want to say that Crockett clip that was put out by.
Edited. Did she freeze?
Oh no!
I know what she's gonna say in that clip. She doesn't say I don't need them. She said like that we're welcoming everybody. They clip it to often show that she's only talking about the Democratic base, but she also says we will, MAGA and not MAGA, but like we conservatives are welcome in this coalition as well.
I'm also curious. I think one of the big sort of scandal gaffe moments that arose right after Crockett declared was the Vanity Fair interview in 2024 when she claimed that some Latinos exhibited a slave mentality when they voted for Trump. And I know she's addressed this, but since they resurfaced, there's been this question of, has that had an impact on her ability to win Latino voters? Unfortunately, I would have liked to ask Kat about that. But we are all working from home because it is 2026 and we are doing the best we can.
She's back. Maybe keep your camera off, Kat. That may help.
Kat, did you hear that question?
I did not hear that question. I do know that when I got caught up, I did want to point out that Beto took 90% of the Black vote. He didn't win people over by trying to reach the middle. Those people happened naturally. He won because of the coalition of minority voters that he brought in. And we've seen since 2018, that every cycle we have shifted to trying to catch those moderates. And in doing so, we have lost more and more Black and Latino voters in every single cycle by doing so, and only seen a 4 to 5% shift in white voters who are the base of the Republican Party. But sorry, Olivia, what was the question?
Oh yeah, no, the question was about the Vanity Fair interview published in 2024, during which Crockett claimed that some Latinos exhibited a slave mentality when they voted for Donald Trump. And she's addressed this, but some of them resurfaced, which has sort of been okay, well, if she wins, how much ground does she have to make up? Did she ever really make amends for that? And I think, to some degree, we've already talked about how neither candidate has really handled this precisely well, but I wanted to know if you think that's something she's still making up the gap in.
I mean, she's talked about it and said that one, you know, she was talking to Black voters and didn't know like the context of how things are being spoken of in the moment. And there's a very different way that, you know, that their community speaks. But I'm also going to be really honest that the majority of people that have commented on this have not been Latinos. And you should hear the way that we are talking in our WhatsApp groups about our family members who voted for Trump. It is very mild compared to what the Congresswoman said. And that's just being honest. And so is it something that I think would impact in a general? No, I think people are going to play ads on it. I think the full context does change things and what she was saying. And she in it, you know, because we have conversations all the time about how we have, you know, even within our own family, Latinos who have immigrated and then try to shut the door behind them. You know, we have family in Chicago who's, you know, the kids are U.S. citizens, the parents aren't, and they voted for Trump. You can guess what we have said in WhatsApp groups. Again, so I think that there is this frustration. I don't think it's as big of a deal as people have thought it was, at least not within the actual Latino community. And most people, like Andre said, like this is something that like us Politico people talk about and like tweet about online. And what I think is really interesting, especially when you're looking at X. X is where political people talk. That's why Howdy is like not on X, is I'm reaching people who are not already having those conversations. My audience is primarily, you know, moms that only have a few minutes, you know, to catch up on politics while their kids are playing in the bath before it gets cold. That's my audience. And so it's very different. The things that we hear and see on X are not making it to them at all.
Speaking of things voters may not care about, last week, a reporter from The Atlantic who profiled Crockett for the magazine in July 2025 said she was removed from the event from the Crockett campaign rally during the last week of early voting. When the Crockett campaign denied it, the reporter Elaine Godfrey produced audio that seemed to confirm what had happened. Then, after denying that Godfrey had been told to leave, Crockett claimed that Godfrey had been sued for defamation, which we fact check, and she has not been. There was a lot of chatter online about Elaine making the situation about herself, which is something reporters do get accused of all the time because we do tend to do that. I'll just be honest. But I got to say, as a journalist, because I have to believe in journalism and its importance in the fourth estate, you know, my concern on this was really like, it's bad enough to kick someone out, but then lying about it afterwards, or, you know, but having someone on your team being the one doing it, to me, this was deeply concerning. And partly, I don't know, I had some folks on Blue Sky be like, who cares what happens to The Atlantic? Which, again, fair enough for voters to not care what happens to the press. But I do wonder how much this might affect other press coverage and really like what it says. And I was really curious from not a journalist's perspective, how you guys saw.
I honestly didn't even click on it partly because it did feel The Atlantic was reposting this article with like a different headline and a different photo every hour today and this weekend. And so it did feel like they were trying to center the journalist in the story. I honestly haven't dug into it. I will say this, not a journalist, but I felt like that the Crockett team has been super open for us to have access and to ask questions. So it felt very, from my own personal experience as a content creator, it felt very much the opposite of what we've experienced. But at the same time, I'm definitely for free press, and even people we don't like. But I know right now it's very heated, and I know that, you know, people that are on the left are being denied access to to, you know, more right spaces and things like that. And so I know that the press is being looked at a little bit differently here. So I can understand the frustrations and the concerns from journalists, legit concerns. And I believe in free press and all of that. I would say for me as a non-journalist, it did feel like a very centering of self in the story.
I think that's where I'm like, well, if you lie to the press, you're willing to lie to the public. But we have a lot of, you know, readers who don't see the press as public servants or as providing anything useful. And I think that trust has really been broken down. And then, you know, this new world where candidates can directly appeal to voters using, you know, not the press, by just using their TikToks, their Instagrams. I think it's completely changed things, as well as the emergence of more creators who, you know, they might be more willing to work with because they like them better, or they're more authentic, or they know them, or whatever it is. Andre, did you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think you were actually going down a really interesting thread there, talking about how the relationship between political candidates and elected officials and press has been changing a lot in the past 20 years as candidates have been able to make their appeals direct to voters. Um, I wish I didn't have to acknowledge this, but like Donald Trump's probably been the single most effective, person at doing that. Um, I I thought this was just I thought this was weird. Campaigns can make their own, philosophical or strategic decisions of how close they want, press access, how they're going to limit it. There's strategic decisions that you make behind closed doors, and that's fine. Um, I I'm not sure why they denied it. That's the part that I think was weird. I'm not going to like extrapolate from there and say that like whatever. I mean, we've seen the comments online. I'm not going to extrapolate from there. And there's people comparing it and saying that's like Trumpian or whatever. This is like an example. This is not like some repeated sort of thing or whatever. So I do think that was a misstep. I do not think it's something they should have done. But I think as people here have said, again, that's not something that I think is salient to most voters, and especially something that was then like that deep into early voting. I don't think there was someone that was like undecided up until the last day of voting and then went, well, she got busted, lying about the kicking out the Atlantic reporter thing. Like, I don't think there's probably a single voter in Texas that's like the deciding thing. So I think it was just a misstep, and people don't always make like perfect decisions. We're on the campaign trail. It's like really high pressure stuff. I feel a little bad for the staffer caught in the middle of it, to be quite honest. That's not a good place you want to be. But I think none of the gaffes that we've talked about tonight are fatal mortal wounds on any of these campaigns. These are not the things that are going to decide big margins for us. I think it's a lot of the other stuff that's deciding these races.
I'm really interested, as like sort of a final question, what folks think about how each will fare in a potential general, or what places they need to handle. Where did they maybe not talk about something they needed to talk about, or leave out a group, or anything like that? Andre, I'm curious if you have thoughts going forward on sort of what both of their challenges would look like.
First, I'll assume this part's unanimous, but Ken Paxton's our best shot at flipping this seat as the Republican nominee. He's a very vulnerable candidate that even Republicans have reasons to dislike, just like we could say about Ted Cruz. And he's got legal troubles and a lot of even more baggage that Ted Cruz did not have. So step one is we get a really unpopular guy to run against. And then step two is whoever wins absolutely immediately day after has to begin doing outreach into the other person's coalitions, right? Like, I believe as Democrats, like, we if you take a loss, of which I have taken many, I assure you, you can have your cry about it, and then we can dust off, and then we got to get back to it, because the differences between us within the party are a lot smaller than the differences between us and the Republicans. But you still got to do that work and win those people over, because even if Democrats then remain loyal, there's a difference between someone that just votes versus someone that is, gonna do a phone bank versus someone that's gonna come show up at doors. And the way you earn that is by making those very like overt that very overt outreach to say like, hey, I know you didn't vote for me, and that's okay. We can have our differences, but now let's work things out. Let's settle these differences, and we got to gear up, in the name of party unity, so that at the end of the day, like, we can flip this seat. Because as I very often say, like, we are in this not because it is like a team sport, but because we are trying to make lives better. And the way we do that is by winning elections. And that's going to require everyone. That's going to require every single person that voted in this Democratic primary period, like, showing back up and dragging 10 of our friends and family members with us, like, for the general election. So, as I'd said way earlier, I think one way or another, this could be anyone's race. The thing that would shock me is if it's a big blowout, in which case then that means, whoever's the winner is going to have a lot of outreach that they're going to have to do to call those people in and bring them into the tent, so that we're fully unified by the time it gets down to getting out the vote at the end.
Kat, what about you?
I mean, I think there's no matter who the winner is tonight, there is going to have to be outreach, to the other's camp. And that really is going to fall on the winner. I don't want us to fall into thinking this falls on the other candidate to come out and do that work for them. It is the nominee's responsibility to get those votes in the general election. For Talarico, and the big, elephant in the room is Black voters. He has consistently polled at about 10%. And unfortunately, some of the discourse we've seen online has been that, well, they're going to vote in the general forum no matter what, because there are reliable voters, so it doesn't matter what they think in the primary. That has been put in writing all over every single app. And I have watched, and this is something that Eric and I warned about very early on, before Crockett even entered, that if that narrative continued, what was going to happen, it is not just that Black voters are our most reliable voters. They are our most reliable organizers as well. And when you have that low a vote share in a primary with our best organizers, that's going to affect you, because they might come out and vote for you, but to organize for you is a different thing. So I think that's something that's going to have to be fixed. Obviously, there has been a lot of damage to kind of the creator ecosystem at large, and attacks from both sides on creators, and that has to get repaired, not just for the general election, but we're going to have session after, and it's going to be pretty brutal here in Texas. Seeing what the talking points already are in these campaigns. And when that comes, all of these out-of-state folks who have suddenly wanted to talk about Texas, I can tell you I can't get any of them to post when there's a bill that's going through. And so we will have to depend again on Texas creators to help get that message out, because I will put Howdy's outreach and me putting out a video, compare that next to anyone's email list. So I think that's something that's going to have to be created and again, or kind of repaired. And that's not just, again, that's not for this cycle. It's talking about, work on it in the future. I think our organizing groups on the ground have taken, different stances with the candidates, and they're very invested in the candidates that they're supporting. That's going to need some healing as well from both parties to have them come back together. Because again, those are the organizers. Those are the wounds that I'm worried about. I'm not worried about people on social media who are upset that their candidate lost. I'm worried about the organizers who have had personal attacks at them, who this has become so personal, and how do we heal from that? And just flat out, the racism is what's going to, criticisms of a candidate, genuine ones aren't going to, impact a general election, but the racism will.
Erica, bring us home.
I have a couple different takes. So one, I'll start with Talarico. He's going to have to get mean. He's been trying to do this above it all, kind of like, religious thing. That ain't going to work. I don't know if you guys have been following the Republican primary, because I have. They have been nasty. John Cornyn is going to sit on there and going to repost him and be like, I don't know what millennial Bravo fan is working for John Cornyn. Have y'all seen it? He is one of the best Twitter users at 70 years old. He's excellent at Twitter. He is going to sit on whoever it is and so I know that kind of how they pitched it is like, oh, he's so nice. You can't do that with him. That's not going to work with John Cornyn. Not going to work with Kim Paxton. Heck, even a Wesley Hunt. It's not going to work. So he's going to have to get meaner and quit doing this above it all thing. It's not going to work. They also are going to bring up religion in a way that I think people are not prepared for. He's going to have some answers beyond just God is love, because the whole thing with God is non-binary, I agree with it. But they're going to go to a place with religion that I think some people are not prepared for. So I'd be prepared for that. I think he has to have some answers for that. It's going to be harder for him. I'm going to be honest. He's going to have some really hard conversations with Black voters. And I mean, that means getting in rooms with people like me who are pissed for various reasons and answering hard questions. And not just answering questions to our face, but having action that matches up with that, because there were promises that were made to us in Black spaces in Houston that never happened. And I have a whole list of those. That's one. For Jasmine Crockett, I think her thing is Kat mentioned, I think she has to do more outreach, of course, to Latino voters. I also think that from an organization standpoint, she came in this race very quickly and kind of jumped in, and I think was depending on name recognition to kind of keep her moving, because she have to spend as much, but she's going to have to spend more money and fundraise and have a full-on apparatus in order to win this state. And of course, do some outreach with the Talarico voters as well. I think the Talarico voter and what that demographic is, I think is a very interesting space. Whereas like, it's kind of like a clear demographic that are Crockett voters, right? That you kind of can go there and do the outreach there. The Talarico voter, I think, is a little bit more split. And so how you reach out to them may require some different work there. So that's, those are kind of my big things that I'm thinking of. But I I feel people are like, like you're a Crockett supporter. How are you feeling? I'm like, I feel peace and serenity in all of this. As my friend said, we're not picking between a Democrat and Donald Trump. We're picking between people that we believe in, that at some point we've all supported. You know what I mean? Like it's not like we don't hate these people. We've all supported them. So I think that gives me some serenity going into tonight. I am truly fine. I did my part. That's how I see it.
Yeah, and I think most of us are that way. Like, I know, Andre, like when I see you in the Capitol, like next session, like we're going to be fighting the same people and like totally fine. I think people online just kind of forget that and like lose their heads a little bit. This is a family fight, and tomorrow will be better.
That's why it's stressing me out. Like exactly. And just as an observer, I am very much ready for them to stop yelling at each other, so that everyone can just wait until the next interprogressive fight, which of course I'm sure will come very soon. Thank you guys so much for being here, and everybody for sticking with us. I know we went a bit over time, and thank you to Kyle for attempting to join, and I'm so sorry whatever happened. If either primary goes to a runoff, that election will be held on May 26th. The general is scheduled. Sorry, go ahead.
I was saying, do not wish that on us.
Okay. Well, the general is scheduled for November 3rd. Hopefully that's the only date everyone needs to remember. Thank you all so much for joining us. You can find us at thebarbedwire.com, where you may subscribe to our free Wild Texas newsletter, support our investigative journalism, or become a member and get some of our deeply strange merch for free. Again, a reminder that if you're in Dallas County, it has been extended and you can still vote. And otherwise, we'll see you on the other side. Thanks, everybody.